welcome to Mind That Childminder, a podcast that's meant for us childminders. I'm Charlotte and I'll be your host and colleague throughout these episodes, and today we're going to be talking all about sleep routines, why they're important for young children, well, and everyone. So let's grab your cuppa and start chatting about it. Why is sleep so important? Wow, sleep is a huge part of our everyday life. We all do it, hopefully, and it affects us in loads of different ways. We know our mood is affected greatly by sleep. If we don't get enough sleep, we know we are grumpy, irritable, groggy, all these kinds of things. And I believe that children feel just the same. If they don't get enough sleep, they also have these kind of irritable, and you might see it through some challenging behaviours. So it greatly affects our moods. Our bodies also carry out loads of processes while we sleep. And those things are kind of related to digestion and repairing things in our body. But a lot of research suggests that our brain undertakes lots of processing while we sleep. And this is especially important for children as their brains are rapidly developing. And there's some research that suggests that synapses are consolidated and organized within our brain. So instead of creating new synapses, it's actually kind of reducing them and sorting them out and organizing them. And if in case you're unsure what a synapse is, it's kind of the gap between two neurons in the brain, and it's where kind of you can get the brain to kind of talk to each other, apparently. So it's kind of ways that your parts of your brain can communicate and learn new things. So if you're trying to build connections, which children are doing often, those synapses need to be available and ready to do that job. So if it's all clogged up then and full and not organized, then it would be much more difficult to learn. So having lots of sleep helps your brain to kind of sort itself out, organize itself, get rid of what it doesn't need, and be ready to learn the next day. So that is why sleep is very important, is because our bodies are changing and fixing themselves and organizing and getting rid of the things we don't need while we're sleeping, and it's the same for young children. When we think about sleep, there are also usually two different types of sleep that we think about. There is non-rapid eye movement, and that's got 3 stages to it. And there is rapid eye movement, and that's the one that we often hear called as REM sleep, and that's the one where you are dreaming. So there are different types of sleep, which we might talk about through the episode, but just to make you aware of that. I was trying to find some information about how many people kind of struggle with sleep, and according to Wiggs L in 2006, and this was in a different piece of research by Cook, Appleton and Wiggs, up to 25% families struggle with sleep issues. So that's actually quite a lot of people, as 25 out of 100 people have sleep issues within their family unit, their young family unit. So it's going to be quite common with families that we work with, that there are going to be children and families who are struggling with sleep. So not only does that impact the child, that they're probably not getting enough sleep, and so their learning opportunities or their behavior and all other sorts of things are going to be affected while you're caring for them. It's also going to be affecting the parents and how they're going to be parenting the child as they're getting more grumpy and they're struggling with their own health and well-being. So it's definitely something we need to be looking out for and learning how to support, because it's going to be affecting the child and the family. But the family being affected is also going to kind of impact the child in a second way. So I think it's something we definitely need to look further into. I guess a good place to start with this topic is knowing how much sleep a young child actually needs to have. So it's going to be different for everyone. There are different kinds of personalities and kind of sleep styles, I suppose. You've got morning people, you've got evening people, kind of these early birds and night owls type of people. So it's going to be different for everyone. But as a rough guide, I looked at Great Ormond Street Hospital, and it's a good UK guide. And they suggest that for newborns, it's 8 to 18 hours a day. So that's quite a big difference, isn't it? Like, one baby might need about 8 hours a day and another might need 18. So it's a huge kind of difference. And that's going to be kind of totting up all those little naps as well as overnight. For 4 to 12-month-old children, they need about 12 to 16 hours, and that includes some naps in the day. Children aged 1 to 2 years need 11 to 14 hours a day, and that includes naps as well. Children 3 to 5 years need 10 to 13 hours a day, and that can include naps, although some children by this age might be growing out of naps. Children 6 to 12 years old need 9 to 12 hours overnight, and teenagers aged 13 to 18 years might need 8 to 10 hours a night, but they're quite often going to be on a different sleep schedule where they're getting later to bed and later to rise. So this is a rough guide, and I do feel that Great Ormond Street Hospital is a good, reliable source of information for this kind of thing. So they also talk a lot about something called sleep hygiene. And sleep hygiene is basically a fancy word for a sleep routine and making sure that everything is kind of suitable and ready for you to go to sleep. It's the preparation stage for you going to sleep. And they have all sorts of tips and guides about this. And they suggest that the routine is contributing to how well a child can sleep. They suggest that the routines and things like screen time, caffeine and diet are all going to be contributing factors to how much sleep a child is getting and the quality of the sleep. So it's really important that we have good sleep hygiene, and that means that we're more likely to see positive impacts of sleep because it's going to be going better for each family. Let's dig in a little more detail about sleep hygiene. So what is the general advice? Screens are a huge part of topics of discussions these days, and Great Ormond Street recommend that you turn off screens 30 to 60 minutes before bedtime. And I've looked around at other kind of information and research sites, and they all suggest a similar amount of time. And this goes for you too. You should be switching off screens 30 to 60 minutes before bedtime, and also making the environment more kind of inviting to sleep. So dimming lights. If you don't have a light dimmer, you can, change from the main light to some kind of beside the bed lighting. And that was kind of a switch flicking motion I made with your hand if you're watching on YouTube. And we hear it a lot to do this, but do we really know why? I kind of tried to find out a bit of information about this, and according to Child and Adolescent Mental Health Service, our bodies produce a hormone called melatonin, and that is a signal for our brain that it's dark and that it's time to go to bed. So again, another reference to those cave person times. We saw that it was dark outside, time to go back in the cave and go to bed. However, if we give our brains bright lights, which are usually seen through screens, TVs, general lighting in the house, that puts the melatonin production on pause, and that means that we're not getting our brain to give the signal that it's time to go to bed. So you can see how if you delay that hormone from being produced, or not even let there be a chance for the hormone to be produced, that it's going to make going to bed much more difficult. Our brain is not going to be saying to the rest of our body, come on, it's time to get sleepy now, go and get that hot drink and go to bed. And this is particularly challenging because a lot of us use TV to chill out before going to bed. So, it's not super engaging, and it's not something that we have to put a lot of effort into. We can just consume it, and it feels like it's relaxing, but it's actually stopping us from getting sleepy in the most part. And for some of us, it's going to be, not necessarily 100% kind of, if you watch TV, you're not going to fall asleep, because I have often fallen asleep watching TV. But then we think about the quality of the sleep. So yes, we might fall asleep in front of the TV, but the quality is often different. And there are going to be things like your brain will be registering all those sounds as part of the room, but then when the TV switches itself off, you wake up. Or when something else happens in the show, or the light kind of changes in the show, then you wake up and you have disturbed night's sleep. So this is where sleep hygiene comes in. And if we switch the screens off for 30 to 60 minutes before bed and we dim the lights, we're getting that melatonin hormone production, and that's going to be giving the rest of our body the signals that it's time to go to bed. And this is particularly important for children because they are having more access to kind of screens now, and I'm a big fan of screen time for my own personal use. I'm a big gamer. I like TV, I like movies, So it would be very hypocritical of me to say that children shouldn't be having any screen time at all, and I personally don't believe that's the case, but I do think it needs to be managed carefully. And maybe my mum was very wise when I was a child not letting me have a TV in my bedroom, even though I really wanted one, because it does affect your quality of sleep. So we need to make sure that all screens, so TV, tablets, any kind of gaming system, phones, anything like this needs to be taken away 30 to 60 minutes before bed. So what are people meant to do if we're taking away the screens 30 to 60 minutes before bed? Because that's quite a long time, like an hour before going to bed, no screens. You need something to do to relax. But you know, I would find that very difficult to just sit around not really doing anything, waiting to fall asleep. So there are calm activities that children and us could be doing to help us feel more sleepy. Things like having a warm bath, having calm stories, although this doesn't work for everyone. I'm certainly looking after a child right now. The books are the most exciting thing in the world. So they no longer have books before bedtime because it's just too exciting. But you can get calm stories, and lots of children enjoy a calm story before bed. Colouring is also another calm activity, and things like simple jigsaw puzzles. Things that you can do in a slightly dimmed lit room that don't require you running around or thinking overly hard, and that just make you feel relaxed. You can also do things by habit stacking, and that helps you create a routine. So habit stacking is where you get one habit or one part of your routine and you put it with another one, and that helps you to reinforce the particularly new habits that you want to achieve. So if you want to kind of encourage children to build a bedtime routine, you can stack the habits of having a bath, brushing your teeth, reading a book, going to bed. And so you're stacking the habits up together, and that will help create the routine, and also helps them to create positive habits for the future, because you want to instill the teeth brushing, for example, it well into their future. So if you stack it on top of other habits that are already there, then that will make it much easier for their brain to learn and to remember. And a huge part of sleep routines is to be consistent, and it's a huge point from all the research that I've looked at. No matter whether you're on holiday, if you're enjoying the festive season, having family stay over, that families need to try as best as possible to keep the sleep times and the routine the same, especially for young children. Our bodies work in cycles throughout the day, and if you start disrupting them or they're inconsistent, this can lead to a sleep disruption. And it's really difficult, isn't it? I can really fully empathise with families that have got grandparents around that they don't get to see very often, and things are very exciting, so you let the children stay up late, but then they're wrecked the next day, and then it starts disrupting how they're going to be the next few days. And you know, those good habits kind of go down the drain a bit, and it's much harder work to get it all back in, and you know, and start feeling better and get the right amount of sleep again. So it's a huge thing to be consistent, and it's something that we need to consider as practitioners, that we support families and that we empower them to say to, you know, family members and things, that it's okay for them to say, no, the children aren't going to stay up late, they need to get their sleep. And that's just how it is in our household. So we need to ensure that we're empowering people to be able to say that that's how it works in their house. But also, if they do get out of routine, that, you know, they're making an educated choice in doing so, so that, you know, we can help families know that the consistency is really key, and that if they choose to then disrupt the, you know, the sleep because of holiday and things, then they're going to be prepared that it's going to be difficult, because that's just how humans work. So people making educated and empowered choices, and we don't need to judge whether that's right or wrong. It might be right for them at that time, but you know that they're making an educated choice, and that they know when they come back from their holiday where they've let children stay up late every night, that they're going to have their work cut out for them, and that their children are going to be behaving vastly differently to their regular selves because they're overtired, and that they need to be aware of that and not kind of punishing the children or taking it out on the children that, you know, their behavior is more challenging than usual, it's kind of like, well, you've made that choice and these are the consequences of that choice. And so they need to be more aware that that's likely to happen. So if we can empower families to make those decisions with all the knowledge, then that will be very helpful. But this is all well and good. But what on earth has all of this got to do with childminding? Well, other than, we can understand if children are struggling because they're tired, or we know that they've had a bad night and how this is going to impact them the next day, or supporting families through creating a healthy sleep routine and, making sure sleep hygiene is going in the right direction. We also have to deal with sleep routines in our settings, and ours look quite different to other settings because usually kind of large group-based settings will have rooms of children of all the same age. So they will have a baby room and the babies all sleep in this kind of room full of cots. Or they might have a toddler room where all the children lay on sleep mats and they all sleep at the same time. And that's when the staff have lunch breaks and they take it in turns. So our setting looks quite different because we have mixed age ranges, and there are group settings that have mixed age ranges and will have similar things. But for childminders in general, we are more likely to have a range of ages that we need to cater for. And this can be quite challenging with sleep because we will have a baby that needs to sleep 2 or 3 times a day, and we'll have a toddler that needs to sleep in the afternoon, and then we'll have another one that might be transitioning out of sleep or not having sleep at all. So it's quite difficult to manage sometimes, and I feel like it's quite a unique part of childminding that we have to be able to cater for this. So at the moment, I thought I would share my current routine, and this current routine has been in place for a long time, and it works really well for me, but it's going to work differently for everyone else. But part of this podcast is sharing experiences and taking what works for you and leaving what doesn't work for you. So currently, my sleep routine starts at lunchtime, which seems bizarre. We have lunch, and then the children wash their hands and faces. They all have their individual flannels and they wash their hands and face. Then after that, they are asked to sit in a cozy area that's got books and soft cushions and soft toys and all quiet things. So there are no kind of button operated toys. There are no books that make noises, particularly in that corner either. I don't have any exciting toys in there. And while this is happening, so while they're finishing their lunch and kind of transitioning over to that area, I turn out the main lights in the room and I switch on kind of lamps that are less bright, and they're more of a yellow colour, those ones. My main lights are quite white, but my afternoon lights are more yellow and calm and soft. And I shut all the blinds and curtains in the room, so they have enough light to read their books. It's dimmed down as Great Ormond Street recommends, and kind of they're starting to see visual cues as well of it getting darker, me organising the blinds in the beds and things. So after this, while they're calming down, because sometimes after lunch they're quite riled up, I will be tidying up the lunch things, and they'll be sitting in that corner kind of on their own. I can still see them, obviously. And once I've tidied up the lunch things, I get out their individual sleep mats. That's how I choose to sleep. Then they have their own sheet, they have their own blanket, they have a mat that's on the floor, and I will put their comforter or their cuddly toy, if they have one, on the bed. And if they don't have a cuddly toy from home, they're welcome to choose one of the cuddly toys from the basket and have it with them for sleep. And then when the sleep areas are prepared, I would choose a book. We read a lot of books before sleep here. So I choose a book and each of the children choose a book, and then we read them all together. So that usually ends up being about 4 short books. And I do say to the older children who choose really long books that we will read that one a bit later, and can they choose a shorter book because the baby needs to go to sleep. So then after this, I'm always careful to try and use the same language. So after we've read the books, I'll say book time's finished, now it's time for, and then they fill in with bed. So they're quite good at filling in the next part of the routine as well. I use that quite a lot. Like, now you've washed your hands and face, it's time to read and then they answer book. So this is a great tip that you can get them to know the routine after a few goes by filling in the next word themselves, and they feel empowered to then toddle off and go and do the next part of the routine. After the book time and they're getting ready for bed, children who need the potty and have nappy changes are done then, and then I settle them and tuck them into their beds, and I put calming music on, and it's the same music every day, and it's very boring for me. I did this year put on a different music for Christmas time that was Christmas calming jazz music, but generally it's the same music every day, and they're usually asleep by like the second or third song of that playlist. And it is a bit like, because this routine is the same every day, I use the same words every day, super consistent, they start to develop it on autopilot and they do know what's going to happen next. And I try to, if we go out on a big outing, I try to keep it as consistent as possible, but sometimes, life is a thing that gets in the way of routines. So if we go on a big outing, I try to set up the sleep mats before we leave. So when we come back, they're ready, kind of, to get ready for bed, and that I don't put the bright lights on when we get home. I put the calm lights on, and we pick up from that part of the routine. It's always a last resort to change the sleep routine, and I try to kind of catch it from we have lunch and then we come home and get ready for sleep. So I try not to mess around with it too much. So this is my main kind of afternoon routine, and it can be different for different children. For younger children, especially babies, I try to tailor it more to their own timings, but I always try to do and say the same things each time. So, I try and make the lights dimmer for them, or say the same things, so that as they kind of develop into, especially when they get used to being in the setting and they're a bit older and they're going to be doing that afternoon routine that I've listed above, that they already know what's going to be coming next, and they know that that's when they're supposed to be getting sleepy. Ultimately, it's trying to create a routine that's consistent and calm and the same every day, and you need to do what suits your daily routine and the children in your care. And I can hear you saying, like, yeah, this is great if all the children sleep at the same time, if they're all a similar age, but what do you do if you've got multiple sleep routines in your settings? And this is where we kind of differ from other settings, because nurseries are far less likely to have mixed age groups, and they're also less likely to be going out with young babies who need naps 2 to 3 times a day, and they're not likely to be also going out on trips to play groups and farms and zoos and anything else we do in our communities. And it's quite a lot to juggle, and it does create a unique challenge for childminders. So how I do it is I think about the equipment and the places where the children are going to be sleeping. So this is things like having a sleep safe buggy, a buggy that lays down completely flat. I like my buggies to have a really big hood, so it makes it dark in there, and it means I don't have to put a kind of a blanket over the top of the buggy, because that can be a potential for overheating. It's not advised to put blankets over the front of buggies anymore. And this means that babies are going to be able to sleep while you're out and about, hopefully. And usually if I know I'm going to be getting a baby into my setting, that I will have a discussion with parents that they try to get their child used to having naps in the buggy if they've got a sleep safe buggy, and kind of not having contact sleep. That's a really difficult one to change if the baby you start looking after has only really ever had contact naps. That can be really challenging for us to transition. So trying to have those conversations with parents early, that they are starting to carry out elements of routines that you will be carrying out where the child kind of has the best, strongest attachment is going to be very helpful for us going forward as a setting. So you might have a baby that sleeps 2-3 times a day, and then you also have a toddler that sleeps in the afternoon, and then you have a preschooler that doesn't sleep at all, and that's going to be really challenging to contend with, because we don't always get that magical 3 children sleeping at a time, / 6 children sleeping at a time if you're in a larger setting working with another childminder. So if you use multiple rooms in your house, that's great, because you can put up a travel cot and you can put baby to sleep in there kind of 2-3 times a day, and it doesn't affect what you're doing in the other room really, other than maybe a bit more gentle speaking. However, if you only have one room that you use in your house, this can be quite challenging, because you need the baby to be able to sleep, but you also need to allow the other children to play. And how I manage this is that I have just a designated rest time. So this at least fixes kind of the issue of the toddler, the afternoon nap. So in my setting, that sleep routine carries on regardless of if I even have any sleeping children, because the likelihood is that I will get sleeping children again at some point. And I also believe that rest is important for children even if they don't sleep anymore. I don't agree that children need to be fired up and running around all of the day, all of the time, after lunch, straight outside, and they've already been outside. I feel like there needs to be at least 15 minutes of some time in the day where they sit down and do something calmer. And of course, there are going to be children who are more active than others, and you can do activities during that time. I'm not saying they have to sit there twiddling their thumbs doing nothing or being told to sit still, but there are different types of play, and I think that we need to be providing opportunities for calm and rest. So that sleep routine I talked about earlier is carried out whether I have sleeping children or not. It's just the length of time might be different. I'm not going to ask them to play calmly for an hour if there are no sleeping children. So you can offer soft toys, blankets, cushions, books, puppets, quiet crafts, puzzles, quiet loose parts, anything that will help an older child to relax and allow others time to sleep or to rest. And there are other things called busy bags, which I haven't used for a really long time, but busy bags and fidget toys, and these things that only come out at nap time. So it kind of makes those older children look forward to having their rest time, because there are certain activities that they only get to do at nap time, so that it doesn't seem kind of like a punishment to be sitting down and being calm, that they actually have something to look forward to. And also it's kind of nice for the older children, because they get a bit more of that one-to-one time with you that they might not get at other opportunities of the day. If all the other children are sleeping, then you get to play a quiet board game together, and it's just really nice. So it can be a really lovely thing to do if we kind of use a good strategy. Like I said earlier, I use music as a cue for bedtime, and I use soft instrumental music, and this helps to signal to the child that it's time for bed, but it also helps signal for the other children that don't sleep that it's time for quiet time. And I quite often use the music as a kind of a level of sound in the room, so that the children who are awake are not are encouraged to not speak any louder than what the music is in the room. And that helps to create an atmosphere for the sleeping children. Although this is fine for nap time with the music, I did a bit of research into kind of sleep time music, and it's recommended that at night time you can put sleep music on the kind of the initiating of the routine, but then you try switching it off after they've fallen asleep, so that it helps them get enough of that REM sleep that we were talking about earlier. So as soon as they're fallen asleep and they're kind of out for the count, then we switch the music off. So that's kind of my routine, and if you have a different routine, I would love to hear about it. This routine has worked really well for me for about 10 years, but obviously There are different ways for everyone, and I would really look forward to hearing your comments and things about that on the Facebook or YouTube comments or Spotify comments or any of the places. I would love to hear about what works for you. Parenting is a funny old thing. Some of you are going to be parents already, so you might be more aware of these things. I am not a parent, so sometimes I have to do a lot of research on parent forums and things to find out the experiences of parents, or common experiences of parenting. And this is of interest because how we support parents can feel different to how other professionals support parents. And I think we're in a really interesting position. And I'm going to describe this a bit more. So parents have a wealth of formal and informal information available to them. And I think this can be really overwhelming. It's very easy to judge parents who are making kind of common, not mistakes, but kind of they're making choices that are creating those outcomes. And we can see that from our position. It's like, well, if you're choosing not to put your child to bed until 10 o'clock, then this is what happens. But when you're in the throes of it, sometimes it's not as easy to see what is going on. So this is why I think our support as professional childminders is really invaluable, because we can see what's going on. We have a lot of experience of what's going on. Many people have kind of lived experience of similar things, although you might not know exactly what that family is going through. You might have had children that struggled to sleep, and I think it can be quite easy for us as childminders, because of all of our experience, to say, oh, well, this worked for me and you should just do that. And I think we need to be careful with that kind of advice, because we should make sure that where possible, our advice is research backed. Most parents, according to Cook and Appleton in 2022, say that parents are using internet searches as their main way of finding out parenting tips. And we know full well that not all internet advice is created equal. We know there is kind of fake information out there. There is information that seems to come from professionals and it's not. And that, people are just kind of making up their own thing and not saying that they're kind of, this is their own theory. And they're kind of putting it out there as kind of the true hard facts. So I think that we need to be really careful we're not falling into that, and that we need to be finding information that is research backed and that is kind of trusted, and that we aren't just kind of going off what worked for us one time, and being aware that each family is different. So yes, what works for you in your setting previously, that's great. And just like my routine works fabulous for me right now, I might get a child come along who it doesn't work for, and I need to work a bit harder at figuring out how that's going to work. So I think we need to, and I think childminders are very strong at being empathetic about different situations, and that any advice we're giving, we're making sure is kind of correct and is research backed, because so many parents do not get research backed interventions and support. And kind of, looking at the research out there, this is highly, highly important. If we give this kind of, oh, well, this works every time kind of information that's not really backed up by science, then that parent might well try that and it not work for them, and then them feel like they're failing, or feel like that your information didn't work properly and that maybe they shouldn't listen to you, and all sorts of things. So we do need to be quite careful in our position. We have a position of power that we need to be responsible with, that our information is kind of as backed up as possible. We have this really cool position as childminders where we are both professional in that we can use all this research and our knowledge and our experience, but we're also empathetic with families, and we have a very different relationship often with families, where our advice is actually really valued, as if we were these informal relationships I was talking about earlier. So we are professional, yet we're also an informal kind of advice giving agency, and that puts us in a really beautiful position there. Families are quite likely to listen to us, so therefore we have that power, and we need to be responsible with that power by using evidence-backed resources. And it sounds really strange, doesn't it, to say that childminders have a position of power, but we do. We have a really big impact into how parents choose to parent their children, and we are the people who they see first thing in the morning after they've had a horrific night's sleep and they're in despair. So I think that that's a really big responsibility, and that we need to be taking that seriously. But also know that we have this great ability to get that all important research-backed information out there, because if people listen to us as highly regarded as people who, these informal sources of finding information, such as the internet or people with lived experience, if we're as much value to parents and families because we have those close relationships, but we have the ability to give across really, top-notch advice, that's a really, really super strong PowerPoint for childminders that I think we need to really utilize, and empower other childminders to also realize that this is a really important position that we're in, and it makes such a difference to the children that we look after. Now we know we're in such a position of power, childminders, we need to know what to do with that. So the first thing to do is to know the parenting style of the family that you're talking to them. We need to know that any advice that we give them is going to fit around how they already want to raise their child. There is no one size fits all approach, and coming across in that way is probably going to make them feel like they shouldn't really listen to you, because you don't really want to do it in the way that they do it, or you don't understand what they're kind of going through. So if, for example, your advice is to let a baby cry for a little while when you're trying to sleep train them, but you're speaking to someone who is gentle parenting, they are not going to listen to you. And potentially also, you need to be looking at the research as to if that is kind of the most up-to-date advice that is being given out by sleep professionals. So knowing how the parents want to raise their children is going to be really crucial into the type of information that you're kind of giving and signposting to, and how likely they are going to listen to the advice that you're giving them. Secondly, you need to acknowledge that it's really hard. Oh my goodness, it's just really hard when children don't sleep and you can't sleep, and everybody is grumpy and everybody is having difficulties. And we need to try not to judge the sleep issues as something that they are doing wrong. They are already going to be feeling like that. We don't need to make people feel like they're doing it wrong. We need to acknowledge that this sounds really hard, that they must be exhausted, and we need to go in with support, not correction. So any advice that we're giving, we're trying to support them, and we're trying to come across as like, I can see that this is really hard for you. I really want to help. Not, I can see that your child is really struggling with sleep. Why aren't you putting them to bed on time? So I feel like that's a really important part of our professional approach, that we are going in with support and not correction. Thirdly, we need to listen to the experience that's going on and make sure that there are realistic expectations in place. So if the parent is saying, oh, the child won't go to bed, and they're just like going nuts at bedtime and I can't get them to go to bed at all, but then you're finding out while they're trying to put their child to bed at kind of 5 o'clock in the evening and they haven't done any kind of bedtime routine, that probably there's a mismatch of what is kind of a realistic expectation. A parent is probably not going to get their child to go to bed at 5 p.m. When a child has had a nap during the day, and they haven't had time to decompress, and they've had the bright lights on and they've suddenly switched it all off into darkness. So we need to make sure we're listening and we're getting all the description of what's going on. We need the whole story, and lots of settings do home visits now. And if a family is really struggling with this, maybe that's something you want to consider, that you offer a home visit so you can watch the bedtime routine. And you know, if the expectations seem a bit off, then we can give, you know, research backed advice onto what the expectation we would be looking at, and kind of re-educate that, because then that might just kind of, you know, fix the issue anyway. It might go, okay, well, my expectation was off, and if I follow this kind of guidelines, and now everything is fine. So it's not going to happen for everyone, but making sure that expectations are realistic is a really important part of any advice that you're giving. Fourthly, we need to share what the routine is for their child in your setting. If it's working really well, is it something they can replicate at home? Is there, you know, a kind of the album of music that you use that you could share with them, so that signal is there? Is there a habit stacking that you're doing that would work really well at home? So, you know, after dinner, they go and sit down with some calm activities, and then they have their bath, and then they brush their teeth, and then they have a story and go to bed. Is there a routine that their child is really suited to in your setting that they could replicate at home? And fifthly, a really big important part of our job is about safety with sleeping and safeguarding. And part of safeguarding related to sleeping is co-sleeping. And this is something that's very popular, and no matter your personal opinion about co-sleeping, there are some parents who are going to choose to do it, and so we need to make sure that we are giving parents the opportunity to know the risks and the benefits and the latest advice about how to do this safely. So you need to be finding out that research, and if you know that a parent is likely to be co-sleeping with their child, that they have the latest information so they can make that choice themselves and know how to do it as safely as possible. You know, not co-sleeping on the sofa with your baby, that's a big no-no. And having that information available to give to them, having it up around your settings so they can just read it. If you have newsletters, maybe you can add a little bit about co-sleeping in there. And again, it's kind of that going in with support, not correction. It's really, you know, you can't say that that's the right or the wrong thing for that family to do. Co-sleeping is legal. It's a valid parenting choice. Even if you personally don't agree with it and you didn't do it with your own children, or you wouldn't do it with your own children, or any of these other things, there are safer ways of co-sleeping, and we need to have that information available, because ultimately if the parent chooses to do that and we are just judging them and they don't have the research backed advice, something is more likely to go wrong. So we need to make sure that we're supporting. These are the research backed ways that are the safest way for you to co-sleep with your child. Here, have this information and I will support you with that. You're trying not to shame them. So that's a really important part of safeguarding in this kind of sleeping situation, is making sure that everything is as safe as possible. In terms of signposting, there are lots of kind of sources of information that we can signpost to. NHS websites are great. There are other professionals that we can signpost to, especially if all of the things we've advised and looked at are not helping. Health visitors, family workers at children's centres if you're lucky enough to live near one, and having up-to-date hard copies of sleep support from reputable sources, such as leaflets and posters that you might get from the doctor's surgery, children's centres, and other such places. So you can have these hard copies of things available and have them available to give to parents, but you need to make sure they're as up-to-date as possible. Another thing to consider in all of this is special educational needs and disabilities and how this affects sleep. Children with SEND are more likely to have sleep problems, and this can be caused from a range of factors. It can be something from not understanding differences and changes in the day, struggling with transitions and routines. It can be something to do with pain. If you have a child with disabilities who experiences pain, you're going to be completely not in control of that, and that will affect sleep. So it's worth considering what might be causing sleep difficulties with children with SEND. Sensory processing, kind of the lights or the sounds that are around at nighttime or not around. It can be how children have with neurodivergency, how they experience nighttime. The list goes on and on and on. There could be endless reasons. Medication might be having side effects, all these kinds of things. So for parents of children with SEND, a good start of all of the above is to try all of the steps that we've already talked about. And if there are still issues, then suggesting that they write down a sleep diary is going to be really helpful. It's a great way to build up evidence for them to take to a medical professional, because as we all know, with everything, we need evidence, evidence, evidence. So if they have a sleep diary, they might be able to see if there's any triggers, any patterns. Is it every night? Is it once a week that there's a sleep issue? And having that diary available is going to mean they can take it to a professional and say, here's all this information already, help me. We need to remember that we are not medical professionals, and we need to know our own kind of limitations, and we need to know when it's time to say, this is out of my depth a bit, you need to go and seek support from an external agency. But what we can do is we can have that contact information for the external agency. We can know already what's in our local area. Do you have a children's centre just down the road? Do you have a GP surgery that has a sleep clinic once a month? Are there charities available that could help with sleep? So knowing what's available in your local area and kind of becoming that knowledge hub is going to be very helpful when you see an issue arise and you know immediately where that family can get support from. With children with special education needs and disabilities, hopefully they will have a team around the child, and when you are involved in a team around the child or team around the family and you're having meetings, this is something that you can talk with the parents about beforehand, that maybe this is something we need to raise in these meetings around these other professionals who will be able to seek support. Something else to consider with all of this information about sleep that we've been talking about is more on sleep safety. And I'm sure we're all aware that sudden infant death syndrome is something that we need to take incredibly, incredibly seriously. It is unknown why some babies die suddenly from sudden infant death syndrome, and there is advice from the NHS that we must follow, and we must recommend it to families to help reduce the devastating situations that happen. This is advice I've taken directly from the NHS page in December 2024. Please make sure that if you're listening to this episode at a later date, that you double check the website for the latest advice, because it might have changed, and I am not going to be responsible for giving you out of date advice because you've listened at a later date. So please make sure you double check. And if you live in a different area, also please do check what your country or area recommend. So we place babies on their back to sleep. Babies should sleep in the same room as an adult until they are 6 months old. So this doesn't necessarily mean co-sleeping, but it does mean in the same room. The head needs to be uncovered, and you tuck the blanket in no higher than their shoulders. If you use a sling, there is guidance out there for sleeping babies in slings, but it's generally upright and their head and face is uncovered. Place babies at the foot of the cot. Do not let the baby get too hot or too cold. Babies are not good at regulating their temperature. So if you have the ability to monitor how hot the sleep area is, that's a very good thing. Never share a sofa or armchair to sleep with a child. Follow safe co-sleeping guides that can be found on the NHS website. No smoking, and please make sure you go and read more about safer sleeping and have the information available for parents and families. We need to make sure that that is our top priority. Safeguarding is our top priority, and sleep safety forms part of safeguarding. Safeguarding is not just child protection from kind of abuse, neglect. It is also kind of safeguarding, making sure sleep areas are safe, making sure everything is safe for children. So do make sure you go and read the NHS pages or the equivalent in the country that you're from, and make sure that you have that information available is the most important thing. We've chatted loads about supporting children with sleeping in the most part. However, we talked earlier, pretty much at the start of the episode, about how we are affected by a lack of sleep. And so we need to make sure our sleep is great in order for us to be better childminders. And in the most part, sleep routines can be learnt and is very similar to everything we've already been discussing. So great news that, you can train yourself to have better sleep. And there are other tips for adults, such as reducing stress. We need to get treatments and support for any conditions that might be impacting your sleep, such as anxiety. It might be that you need some therapy to help you, kind of cognitive behavioural therapy that helps you to learn processes and rethink things. You need to plan your downtime carefully, remembering about the sleep hygiene. So make sure that 30 to 60 minutes before bed we don't watch TV or play on our phone or computer games, sadly for me, and that we have a nice bath or play a jigsaw puzzle. We need to plan that downtime very carefully and not take it so lightheartedly that we have a glass of wine before bed, which is like a stimulant, or your relaxing nighttime drinks need to not involve caffeine, all of these kinds of things. So planning more carefully what your calm things are. I need to think about what your calm things are, because for different people they're going to be different. Some people are calmed by doing a word search. Some people are calmed by listening to music and meditating. For me, meditation is very stressful, so it's different for different people, and you need to think about, when you do activities, how it's making you feel. Use your bedroom only for sleep and bedroom activities only. Don't try and work in there. I try, where possible, not to have a desk in there where all your work is, and try not to use your phone in bed. Try to keep your bedroom ready for sleep. So instead of walking in, putting on a bright light, shutting the curtains, doing all this thing, you're trying to have a dim light on when you walk in. So it's, everything is just kept at the best possible kind of environment for you to be going to sleep. No strong smells in there. So if you go to do your nails, for example, if you're going to put nail polish on, or your partner puts nail polish on, try to get them not to do it in the bedroom, because it's going to stink in there and it's going to be hard for you to sleep. And make sure that the area is a nice temperature for you. And this can be difficult if you are co-sleeping with people, because they might like the room colder than you like, or you might be having a hot flush and need the room to be cooler. So it's kind of difficult to manage maybe. And you know what? There's nothing wrong with if you are married or living with someone else and usually share a bed, but it's becoming more difficult to maintain because of your differences with sleep styles. It is okay for you to sleep in different areas if you have that option available. Like, it is fine. It doesn't mean your relationship is failing or any of these things. What society expects is different to what works for everyone. Personally, here we have an electric blanket that we made sure has two different sides, so that I am freezing all the time. So my side can be turned up warmer. I know people who have quilts that have kind of two sides of thickness, so one person has a thinner layer than the other person. There are loads of different ways to manage it, but it's really important that you don't just try and suffer it through and instead end up awake half the night. And if you struggle with sleep, please go to your GP, because it will be affecting you in many different ways. We talked about how your body does digestion at night time. We talked about how brains organize themselves during our sleep. We all of these processes, if you struggle to sleep, are also going to be affected. So please go and see your GP. If you think it will be useful, write a sleep diary for yourself. And one more thing about sleep is, and it applies to all of us, both adults and children, is to make sure that you are doing enough in the day that makes you feel tired. So our job is pretty exhausting if we do it right. If we're spending loads of time outside, we're running around, we're doing all sorts of things, we're busy, we're learning, we're experiencing things, all of this is going to be making your body exhausted and being able to make you fall asleep better. So if we are making children sit down, be bored, not do anything, and then they've got all this extra pent up energy, and the same for us, it's why we go to exercise classes and things, get fit as well as exhaust ourselves. The more we do in the day, the more tired we're going to be in the evening, and that will help us to sleep. If we've got too much pent up energy, whether that's children, families, or us, we're not going to find it harder to sleep. So make sure that you're doing enough with your day and that you aren't just bored all day sitting around doing nothing. I'm sure as childminders you're not doing that, but as just a side note, to make sure that your curriculum and your offer is active enough to be making sure that everybody is feeling tired by the end of the day. I think that's us done. I think we've talked a lot about sleep. We have talked about why it's important, what sleep does to our bodies. We have talked about some challenges that might face people and families. We've talked about how we need to be supportive, not judgmental, about giving advice. The type of advice we give is really important, and where we source that information from. We've talked about when to know our limits as professionals. We've talked about our position of power, how we're in a really interesting position as childminders to be both a formal and informal source of information, and how we're going to wield that power to kind of empower families. We've talked about how to get a good sleep routine, what sleep hygiene is. We've talked about sleep routines in the setting and at home. We've talked about loads, haven't we? I hope that it's been helpful. And yes, please do share anything on sleep that you've learnt or interesting facts. I love it. I love an interesting fact, me. So please come and bombard all the comment sections about all these tips and routines that you follow yourself. And also bear in mind that this was a really quick gloss over of the subject of sleep, and that there are people whose whole job it is to talk about sleep. And if you find it interesting or you want more information about it, it's out there. And that this isn't the be all and end all of information about sleep or brains or anything. This is a really simplified kind of thing. I am not an expert in sleep, but I have kind of interest in all of these things, so I like to do research on them and to share that information with you, and also that we share similar experiences, because that's part of childminding, is that and that's why I've set up this podcast, that hopefully your experiences may be similar to mine and that you feel empowered to kind of wield your childminding power to the best of its ability. So make sure you get all of that information that you need to be able to advise parents properly, and get your empathy on for parents and families who are struggling, and figure out calm things for yourself that don't involve TV. That's really difficult for me. A lot of what I like is based around screens, so I have to work very hard on reading and audiobooks and all these kinds of things to make me feel sleepy. And just generally take care of yourself. I hope the episode has been helpful. I can't wait to hear from you on Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, Instagram, X, previously known as Twitter. All of these places. Please come and follow and chat with me about it. And I will look forward to speaking to you in the next episode. Take care and sleep well, and I will see you soon. Ciao for now. Mind that childminder. Find us on Facebook, X and Instagram for more about upcoming episodes. All topics discussed are intended for entertainment and educational purposes. This podcast is not intended to give any legal advice and is purely an opinion and supported piece.